Okay, as you can see, the title of this presentation is Addiction in the Christian World. We will be talking today about addiction from a Christian perspective and how addiction can be different for those in the Christian world and outside of the Christian world, and just how that will all apply. So first of all, let's go ahead and go over our key learning takeaways. The first one is we live in an era of seclusion. The second one, we live in an era of numbing. Third, we place ourselves in areas of shame. And last, we rely on things that are dependable. We will be going over all of these learning takeaways today. And as you can see here, the first one we're going to go over is we live in an era of seclusion. Along the bottom of the presentation, you're going to see this guide bar the whole time, and the area that we are going over is going to be highlighted. So, before we can talk about the fact that we live in an era of seclusion, we need to talk about core needs. So first of all, what are core needs? Core needs are deep, undeniable needs. These needs are righteous, and they're ingrained in us as part of being human. It's again very important to realize that core needs are undeniable. There's no way that we can avoid them. They're part of us. Whoops, let's go back here. Another thing about core needs is that they are non-negotiable. So that means that these needs must be met in either a healthy or an unhealthy way. We can't just say, oh, I'm just going to choose to not have this need. It will be met. And if we don't actively meet it in a healthy way, then it will most likely be met in an unhealthy way, because our bodies will rebel against us and find a way to meet those needs. So let's just run through some examples of some core needs that humans have. A very, very obvious one would be food. If we don't have it, then we're going to go out and steal food. Even the most righteous of individuals will probably resort to doing something like that if they don't have food. Another one would be shelter, very obvious. Another one would be freedom to express oneself and create and those types of things. That would be definitely a core need that we have to fulfill, or ramifications happen. And then the one that we're going to focus on is the need to connect with other people on a real level. So the need for relationships with other people, which brings us to the fact that we live in an era of seclusion. This need to connect is something that we have to have, and it must be met in either a healthy or an unhealthy way. So if we don't meet it actively, it will be met in a different way. So, more discussion on core needs. Let's just look at these two illustrations here. This first one represents kind of a soul of a person that has all of its core needs being met. There you can see that it's whole. There's no holes in it. But the second one here is the soul of a person whose core needs are not being met. We can see that it looks good, it's healthy, but there's a hole here. There is something missing that needs to be filled. There is some core need that is not being met. It's undeniable, and it has to be filled because this is an open wound that exists, and we can't just say that it doesn't. So, for this top individual here that doesn't have this issue of this core need not being met, some things will come into their life that are unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether that be inappropriate relationships with other people, drugs and alcohol, pornography, whatever. These things will come into their life. I'm not saying that they will necessarily be partaken of or whatever, but they will come into their life. This person will be exposed to pornography. That's just an example. But the thing is they don't have any holes that really need to be filled by something like drugs, alcohol, pornography. They have a pretty healthy life. They're not perfect, because no one is on this earth, but they have a healthy life. So there is no need for whatever this unhealthy coping mechanism is. So it just bounces off, it's gone. Now this second person, when an unhealthy coping mechanism comes into their life, this is something that gives them a healing effect. It's a bandage that will cover this wound, this hole that they have here. And that's when it turns into an addiction. It becomes a bandage. It covers it. Does it heal it? No. But it does cover it. And that's why it has to be consistently replenished. It's just like makeup. For someone who has skin that might not be the greatest, they have to apply makeup on a daily basis. And that covers those things that might not be the greatest about their complexion. Now, if we apply the makeup one day and then it comes off, via our daily activities, via swimming, that kind of thing, via sweating and showering, then we have this gaping hole again. It has to be applied daily. It doesn't actually heal the problem. And that's what an addiction is. It has to be continually replenished because this core need isn't actually met. It's just covered. It's bandaged. So going further into this idea of us living in an era of seclusion, I went to not a fireside, I went to a big meeting on addiction a little while back, and these are a couple of quotes that came from that. So Kyle Reed, he's a licensed marriage and family therapist. He said these first two quotes here, and he says, "Addiction is an attachment disorder. That's what it is." And what he's referring to here is the idea that addiction is something taking place of a human relationship. We are built to be attached to humans, to find comfort from humans, to have humans fill those holes in us. And when we are not able to find those relationships in a healthy way, something else is going to come. When we cannot meet those needs healthily, something else is going to come into our lives and we're going to use it as a bandage because it's all that we have. And Kyle expounded more on this when he said, porn is not the problem. In fact, porn is the only thing rescuing you from the pain. The relationships are the problem. We rely on things that are dependable. Whoops, let's see where we are here. We rely on things that are dependable. Porn is always dependable. This third quote here is from someone else who was at that conference, and he was giving a presentation. He was a recovering sex addict, so he didn't just have issues with pornography and alcohol and those types of things. He actually was a full-blown sex addict, and he's recovered. And he said in his presentation, for me, recovery was relationships 101, meaning that for him, it was learning how to say hello to people, learning how to just talk to people about the day-to-day things was where recovery started for him. Letting people into his life started filling that hole that the addiction was actually acting as a bandage for. So this brings us to the second section of the presentation. We live in an era of numbing. So, most psychologists, at least everyone that I have talked to, will agree that there are 4 core emotions in humans, with those emotions being fear, anger, sadness, and joy. These are talked about as our core emotions. We notice here that we must be willing to feel all of them in order to feel joy. So we set it up like this, where fear, anger, and sadness are wrapped around joy, because you have to be able to feel fear in order to feel joy. You have to be able to feel anger and sadness in order to feel joy. You can't just choose which one you're going to feel. You can't just say, I'm going to feel anger, I'm okay with that, and you know what, I can feel sadness, and also joy, I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to do fear. When we cut out one of them, generally, we end up cutting out either all of them, or at least we cut out that one and joy. You cannot feel joy unless you are willing to face all of these. So, sometimes fear, anger, and sadness are too heavy, especially for those of us who have lived lives that are heavy, i.e. all of us. So what happens is we start going to these, what we call secondary emotions. They're not just the core things of fear, anger, and sadness, but rather they're a little bit less hard to feel. So we might feel loneliness. We might feel anxiety, resentment, jealousy, irritated towards someone, some stress. Again, we feel these because they're less intense than these core emotions. And they're kind of almost a block for feeling those. It's interesting. And when these are too intense, that's when we start moving into coping behaviors. And we again see here that coping behaviors block us from even feeling our secondary emotions. So these coping behaviors can be addictive behavior. We see here drugs and alcohol, pornography, eating and exercise, need of constant companionship and possibly codependency, staying busy, misuse of religion, which is oftentimes exhibited via perfectionism. So these behaviors on the outside, these coping behaviors, are what addiction is. It's saying, I can't face these emotions. I can't face these secondary emotions. I will numb out. I will live in a place of numbing and just run whenever I feel too much or whenever I feel too little. I will stay busy so I never have to feel anything at all. I will always be perfect. I will attend the temple whenever anything is going wrong. I will immediately turn to my scriptures. I will immediately talk to so-and-so about this. I'll talk to my bishop. I will, I'll be perfect. And yes, we should be religious, but perfectionism is different. It's where we require ourselves to live in a black and white world and don't allow grace in. And obviously drugs and alcohol can be addictions. Obviously pornography can be an addiction. For me, I have dealt with exercise addictions. I have dealt with misuse of religion and perfectionism. I have dealt with an addiction of staying busy. I have dealt with an addiction of codependency, where I have to have constant companionship. And I always wondered why my life was so horrible when I was doing things right. Running is not bad. Friendship and being there for others is not bad. Staying busy and being successful is not bad. Being religious is not bad. For me, God had to really break me down in many ways in order for me to realize that I was numbing myself out from even just experiencing what it meant to be a human being. Which brings us to this next slide. Joy can exist without stimuli. So, all of these coping behaviors, these addictive behaviors on the outside here, there has to be a stimulus. We have to actually physically exercise in order to feel something. We have to participate and view pornography in order to feel emotions. We have to have drugs and alcohol in order to feel something, and on and on and on. Same with these secondary emotions. Something has to be going on in our lives in order to induce anxiety. Something has to be happening in order to induce fear. However, joy is something that we can literally just exist in a state of joy. And the way that this happens is when we choose to actually feel fear, to actually feel sadness, to actually feel anger, to face them. And then joy happens as a result, and we can exist in a state of joy. That doesn't mean we exist in a state of perfection, but we exist in a state of joy. We see here, Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. Fear, anger, and sadness and these negative emotions exist so that we can actually know joy. And when we are choosing to not feel fear and to numb out of that, when we are choosing to not feel anger and to numb out of it or sadness, we are choosing to take ourselves out of mortality and back to the pre-earth life. Back to where we couldn't have real loneliness and fear away from God, a real sadness and anger over not understanding things. We take ourselves out of the plan of salvation that we know was here to give us joy. I also want to read this quote. This is Eve. She says this soon after the fall. Were it not for our transgression, we never should have had seed, and never should have known good and evil, and the joy of our redemption and the eternal life which God giveth unto all the obedient. They fell so we could have these sad things in our life, so we could have joy. They didn't fall so we could numb out and not experience real existence.